Good evening, I'm Klaudia Czerwińska. You're watching World News Tonight, coming to you live from Warsaw. The race against time continues as the U.S. is getting closer to Donald Trump's inauguration day. Ukraine's President Zelensky touched down in Brussels for a NATO meeting to seek further military support ahead of a change of administration in the White House. More on this in just a moment, but first, let's take a look at the latest headlines. Georgian President speaks in front of the EU Council as her country protests against stolen elections. Brussels discusses expanding the EU to include the Western Balkans. 1,000 metric tons of butter from Polish strategic reserves go for sale as the product reached historically high prices. Ukraine is at a crossroads when it comes to Western military support. With the new Trump administration taking power next month, it is doubtful that Washington will uphold the level of support that the Biden administration has provided. The U.S. government says Ukraine has enough to prevail until the end of 2025. Meanwhile, Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky is meeting with NATO allies in Brussels to ramp up more European support for his country. Marek Steele has more.
A new NATO command in the German city of Wiesbaden, set up to assist Ukraine and provide training for its troops, is now operational.
Allies remain committed to delivering on the financial pledge of 40 billion euros in security assistance for Ukraine this year. And the NATO command in Wiesbaden for security assistance and training for Ukraine is now up and running. But we must go further to decisively change the course of this war.
NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte is meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky. The Ukrainian president has touched down in Brussels for talks with his European allies. Although a large part of the discussions concern support for his country, Kyiv may have enough weapons to continue its operations throughout next year, the U.S. has suggested.
The resources that we have already provided them and that we are still on track to provide them before the end of the administration give them the equipment, the material they need to fight through the end of 2025. As it pertains to how much of that is out the door and how much remains, these are obviously Pentagon drawdowns.
Being able to fight through to the end of 2025 does not necessarily mean winning the war, analysts say. Still,
to say that this will be enough till the end of 2025 is, of course, an overestimation.
This graph shows how much Kyiv's allies from Europe and the United States have provided so far, and how much is yet to be delivered. According to data from the Kiel Institute for the World Economy, in November there was still more than 30 billion euros in aid waiting to be shipped from the United States. But another conclusion that can be drawn from this data is that Europe is expected to donate twice as much aid to Kyiv as the United States.
The share of the European Union and of the national states is increasing. However, for the near future, I think it will be impossible for Europe to replace the United States as a military supporter.
President-elect Donald Trump takes power in Washington next month, and his administration wants to push towards a quick end of the hostilities in Ukraine.
We'll be talking to President Putin, and we'll be talking to the representatives, Zelensky and representatives from Ukraine. We got to stop it. It's carnage.
There's a lot of concern that Donald Trump will withdraw U.S. support for Ukraine, at least on part of the military side. A lot is being done to prepare a strategy and approach to deliver as much support and aid to Ukraine as possible before Trump.
Zelensky is also scheduled to meet with the EU's heads of government on Thursday, during the European Council summit being held in Brussels.
European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen addressed the European Parliament on Wednesday, outlining critical priorities for Thursday's European Council, including supporting Ukraine. Georgian President Salome Zurabishvili also spoke to MEPs, highlighting her country's European aspiration amidst 21 days of protests against Russian influence and democratic backsliding. Our European Affairs correspondent Sasha Farbach has this report.
Ursula von der Leyen, head of the European Commission, outlined 2 points which are vitally important for her and her Commission as the European Council summit approaches on Thursday. Those 2 objectives are focusing on Ukraine and focusing on Syria. Now, in her address to European parliamentarians here in Strasbourg, she made it clear that the focus areas should be on those 2 things, saying that there's renewed hope for Syria.
For the first time in decades, hope is back to Syria. The events in Syria will resonate well beyond the Middle East. The fall of Assad is a cautionary tale about the limits of Russia's power projection. Bolstering Ukraine right now is not only a moral imperative, it is a strategic imperative. The world is watching. Our friends, and even more our foes, will observe carefully how we sustain our support to Ukraine, and this support has to be ironclad.
She also made the case to make sure that everyone knew we needed to focus on energy as one of the primary aims of repairing power grids, already touting the energy supplies that have been given to Ukraine, saying very much how Russia had targeted infrastructure and grids, saying more needed to be done for repairs. There's also the economic element of saying that there is a major plug of a gap of financing. IMF has said 42 billion lacking in the coffers in Kiev for 2025, saying that their help is on the way, that there would be help from those frozen assets, the G7 loan, and also the Ukraine facility, which ultimately will total roughly around 20 billion euros, and that's just the elements of what the European Union will provide. And also saying very much that it's about keeping hope alive and the lights on. Now, also someone here at the Parliament addressing delegates was the President of Georgia, Salome Zurabishvili. She also pleaded very passionately here about what needed to be done, more support for her country. Now, remember, it was here in the Parliament in Strasbourg when a resolution passed at the end of November, very much saying that the elections in Georgia were not free and fair, calling on tougher sanctions against the Georgian government. That immediately caused reaction by the Prime Minister of Georgia, saying that he will postpone the accession talks with the European Union until 2028, and has now gone into 21 days of continuous protests by the Georgian people on the streets. So let's hear what the President had to say when she addressed MEPs in Strasbourg.
It's about Europe's strategic interests. Georgia is and has been, and I'm sure will be, the West and Europe's foothold in the region. One that Russia is trying to take over, because Russia remembers its imperial times generals that used to say that who holds Tbilisi holds the Caucasus. And that for Russia has not changed.
She demanded that things be done, more needed to be done in terms of waking up Europe, as this is a strategic decision and also reputational, but obviously appealing here to core European values. And that's Sasha Farbach from the latest, the European Parliament in Strasbourg for TVP World.
Georgians are peacefully protesting against stolen elections and the repression of society. As President Salome Zurabishvili presented today in Strasbourg, their demand is clear: free and fair elections to preserve democracy. Let us listen to our correspondent Don Arlis' report from Tbilisi.
It's been 21 days since the Georgian government decided to cut off talks to European Union accession until the year 2028. It's also been 21 days of mass protests and demonstrations here in the Georgian capital. Now the numbers of people that we're seeing out here has somewhat dwindled a bit. But there's still many people taking to the streets trying to call for new elections, which they claimed were rigged back in October. Of course, they want the Georgian dream government out of power, and they want new elections. Now, Georgia's president, Salome Zurabishvili, was in Strasbourg today making a scathing speech to the European Parliament, of course, highlighting all of the backsliding in democracy that has taken place here in Georgia over the course of this year, and since the Georgian Dream government has simply been trampling what many of the protesters say are their freedoms and fundamental rights.
We will be here until we will get the things for we are asking. But we need like help also from them, like to support. It will be like physical support or either like, I don't know, like informational. We would like to spread our voice to them, and we would like to be heard from them as well.
That Salome is only person in our this system who is really is our voice, Georgian people's voice. So I want to know, I want to say it to like international systems and organizations and etc. I think that sanctions will help us.
So we asked some people here in the streets whether they saw this speech of President Georgian in the European Parliament today, and here's what they told us.
Salome Zurabishvili, she was our president, not older, not past president, like it's now our president.
We hope that they will be on our side and they will make right choice for us, because we really want to be with them, and our future is depend on them.
Also, many protesters saying that they will continue to take to the streets until this government falls, until there are new elections. They also say that they need help from their European and American partners. Reporting from Tbilisi, Don Arleth, TVP World.
European leaders descended on Brussels today to discuss expanding the bloc to include the Western Balkans. This spans countries such as Albania, Serbia and Montenegro. And while some nations seem to be moving closer towards the EU, others are not. TVP World's EU correspondent Angela Skujins is in Brussels. Good evening, Angela. So what is happening on the ground, and have you heard about any conclusions from today's meeting?
Yes, so while a press conference has been delayed, I'm currently at the European Council, but those conclusions from today's meeting were released in the last half an hour, and a top-level analysis of that document suggests that acceleration for certain Western Balkan countries to join the EU is high on the EU's agenda, as well as supporting some of those countries in terms of mitigating the consequences from Russia's ongoing invasion of Ukraine. And now, while we wait for those official comments from European Council President Antonio Costa, as well as European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, here is what Antonio Costa had to say before that official meeting kicked off in the afternoon.
We believe that this enlargement is the most important geopolitical investment in peace, security and prosperity.
And what we know from yesterday's Foreign Affairs Council meeting is that certain Western Balkan countries are inching closer to joining the 27-member strong EU family. This includes Albania and Montenegro, but Serbia, unfortunately, is quite far away from joining the family. Conclusions from that meeting cited that ongoing tensions with Kosovo put both nations at risk from that kind of accession. But, you know, there's going to be a meeting tomorrow in Brussels again, where high-level delegates will discuss some of the big issues facing the continent. This includes Russia's ongoing invasion of Ukraine and the fall of the Bashar al-Assad's regime in Syria. So we'll wait and see as to what comes out of those meetings. But that's all from me in Brussels. Back to you in the studio.
Thank you so much. That was Angela Skujins reporting from Brussels. The ongoing conflict between Kosovo and Serbia can tell us much about the fight for independence and the struggle to keep it. In 2008, Kosovo declared it was splitting, and while the US and many EU member states, including Poland, have recognized the move, countries like Serbia and Russia refuse to accept it. So where does this leave the EU membership prospects of either country? Aaron Daman has more.
This is a complex and enduring standoff.
It's not like both Kosovo and Serbia are contributing to tensions. There's one country, that is Serbia, that has turned itself into Putin's strongest proxy country.
Foremost foreign policy goal of Serbia is to become member of European Union. That's why we are conducting in good faith negotiations with Pristina, Kosovo.
Two differing views on the futures of Serbia and Kosovo, as highlighted in exclusive interviews with TVP World over recent months. On paper, Serbia won't recognise Kosovo as an independent state, and Kosovo won't grant greater autonomy to its ethnic Serbian population. But it's a dispute that refuses to let up, going back to the end of the 1990s Kosovo War and triggering violent clashes, injuries to NATO soldiers and damage to critical infrastructure even in recent years. As it stands, these are the countries that have been granted official EU candidate status. Kosovo is on the potential list, precisely because its independence from Serbia has not been recognised by 5 of the bloc's member states, including the likes of Greece and Spain. In October, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk visited Belgrade and had a clear message for Serbian President Alexander Vučić.
During the Polish presidency, enlargement, including close cooperation with Serbia, will be at the centre of my attention.
So could there be movement on Serbia's accession sooner rather than later?
Serbia has been sending some positive signals, and I think we need to listen carefully to those signals.
It comes as Europe looks to sway the Balkans away from growing Russian influence.
Leaving them outside the EU creates a potential for third players, including Russia, China, the countries from the Persian Gulf, and Turkey, to play their own political games.
A warning that Europe and its enlargement project faces challenging months and years ahead.
The price of butter in Poland has soared by an eye-watering 50% year-over-year, prompting the government to step in. But some experts say that the solution proposed by officials isn't the answer. Jan Kennedy has more.
Butter has now become a political issue, with the highest officials and even presidential hopefuls weighing in on the matter.
Any action that helps lower prices and ensures citizens don't have to shoulder higher costs is a good action.
And the government has decided on such an action. It plans to release 1,000 metric tons of butter from strategic reserves, offering it through a tender to boost supply and bring prices down.
No one can guarantee that butter prices will drop significantly, although this is quite a substantial intervention, but we have reasonable hope.
However, experts are skeptical about its impact.
The government's decision will not have any significant impact on reducing butter prices. I suspect, and this is just my assumption, that the butter will quickly be sold off to other countries such as Germany, where there's a shortage.
So why has butter become more expensive? It looks like the growing price of milk isn't the main issue, and neither are higher producer margins, which in the Polish dairy industry are often as slim as 2%. It turns out that the lion's share of the profits is lost along the supply chain.
The beneficiaries of these high prices are not farmers. We lose a significant portion within the supply chain.
The problem of high butter prices is not limited to Poland. In the Czech Republic, the dairy product recently provoked a political spat between the Prime Minister Petr Fiala and former Prime Minister Andrej Babiš, with both sides blaming one another for the price hikes. Experts say that in a globally connected economy, butter problems in Central Europe are caused by declining supply from the world's largest milk exporter, a country located in the southern hemisphere.
New Zealand, a major exporter of dairy products, is gradually reducing milk production, which means the availability of dairy products on the market is shrinking.
New Zealand is responsible for 1/5 of global milk exports. Unless the global trade in the resource comes back to balance, butter prices won't fall.
And now it's time to move to Strasbourg, where our European Affairs correspondent Sasha Farbag had an opportunity to speak to Salome Zurabishvili, Georgia's president, who officially refused to end her term in office today amid political turmoil in the country.
Now, what we've seen in the past 21 days is brutal crackdowns of the Georgian people as they have aspired to show their willingness to continue their journey to be part of Europe. Now, one woman who has stood the course, who very much has been and still continues to be president of Georgia, Ms. Salome Zurabishvili, has acted on their behalf. And she's here now speaking to TVP World about the future of Georgia and how that relationship impacts not just the region, but Europe as a whole. Madam President, thank you so much for joining us. I want to just start with a quote from Kaja Kallas, the new High Rep. Now, she said some time ago, democratic backsliding will have direct consequences. But if we look at what the EU has done so far, would you say that that's satisfactory in your mind?
Well, it's certainly in line with what we know of how democracies react to autocracies and how Europe reacts to Russia. It's very difficult for 27 countries together to resort to these serious measures that need consensus. But what we would expect more, we have had a lot of moral support, political support from almost all the partners, except one or two. But for the rest, very strong support from the Baltic states, from Poland, from Germany, from the French president that had something that was very rare, this type of direct allocation to the population. So on that side, I can say that there was an adequate reaction from the European Union. I think that they are in the process of measuring what that means. And you were saying, well, democratic backsliding. It's not democratic backsliding. It's much more than that. It's really the imposition of a Russian model in Georgia, which was one of the old and strongest democratic models in the region. That means that Russia is testing a new ground, which is not military intervention, which has not given them the results that they were expecting very clearly, whether it's in Ukraine or whether it's in Syria. And they're testing something new, which is using the elections as an instrument which allows them to consolidate their proxies and in that way take away a country that is striving for democracy and towards Europe, towards its own zone of influence. And that is what the Europeans should be very concerned, because this instrument of electoral war is something that has been used and tested not only in Georgia, without much reaction yet on the elections themselves, where everybody should have said that is intolerable. And we've seen after that in Romania. And then suddenly more reaction. And then people remembered that Moldova had almost fallen for the same type of attacks, but was saved by its diaspora. So then it's clear that it's a strategy, that it's not just one country or the other, that it's not something that translates or division of Georgia towards its European future. Georgia remains united. The 80% of the population that want Europe have not gone anywhere, and they are on the streets. So what happened? Clearly that's a demonstration that the elections were very much stolen. And it's a demonstration that the ruling party manages to intimidate, to put under control a small but a part of the population, and not a small, a very big part of the institutions. And that's what has been to be confronted directly, understood and confronted.
Mm-hmm. You said that this is a kind of a strategy by the Kremlin. You spoke here in the parliament addressing MEPs about this Russian direction of the Georgian Dream Party. But we've come to a very complicated situation. At the same time, you said these elections should have been condemned. They were condemned by the European Parliament in its resolution, but not across the board from member states. You had Viktor Orban of Hungary travel to Tbilisi. You've had this also controversial handshake between the EU ambassador also in Tbilisi with your foreign minister.
Yeah, I wouldn't put it on the same level. The Hungarian visit was deliberately a visit to recognize the elections that nobody else has done until now, not the United States, not any of the other European countries. And it was agreed in advance between the ruling party and the leadership of Hungary. The handshake, which I protested very vehemently, was more a manifestation of this propaganda manipulation of anything that they can use to manipulate. So they will organize things like that. They might be organizing it right now for the Secretary General of the Council of Europe that is visiting and is not well prepared for the type of really Soviet Russian-like propaganda, which uses everything to project a different reality.
Also on the point, in terms of your role now as president, you've been, by the Georgian regime, replaced by someone else, someone more loyal to the party there. There was only one person.
More loyal is not.
Well, in terms of a candidate that they seem to favor, Mr. Kavalyashvili. So what does that mean now for your role? How do we view this person now in Tbilisi? What is your role now in the future? What are your next
Well,
plans?
I think that with the lack of effective instruments that, as you mentioned, the European Union has to deal with that type of it's not a problem, it's more than a problem. It's clear that the minimum what they can do is not recognize a president that is clearly designated. There was one name on one list that was read by everyone, by a parliament that is not legitimate because it has violated a number of constitutional requirements and following elections that were stolen. So I understand that there might be moments when, if it is to put pressure, when our European partners will have to talk to someone in order to transmit the very harsh messages, which is the least they can do if there is nothing else they can do. But he doesn't belong in that category. He will be used only for that to counter me in the way to take out the people's legitimacy which I'm carrying, the state continuity, and to be at this stage the only left independent institution. So if they can kill that by having and projecting this new president or so-called president, then they will achieve that. So I think that the policy of the European partners has to be clear about their approach to this situation.
Mm-hmm. And also, we're sitting here in Strasbourg at the moment. We know that there's a large diaspora community of Georgians here. You mentioned that also in your speech. There's clearly those people that would support you, not just in Georgia, but also across Europe and the world. But what of your future now? Will you be returning to Georgia? Or will your
I have
future...
not left Georgia. I came for 24 hours. There is no question about leaving Georgia. I'm there. And as I mentioned, I do not want, I see some not calls, but suggestions that I would become, I don't know, Tikhanovskaya or the Venezuelan president, which they recognize once he's in exile. And I heard that today probably there is a Sakharov Prize also. I do not want that once everything is finished. What is the use of being supported? I need to be supported now in my country, together with my population.
Mm-hmm. But you are someone who has stood the ground very much for your people, that European path. How does that impact you emotionally? Are you afraid when you return to Tbilisi? Do you fear for yourself or for your people?
Everybody, I think, to some extent fears something because we are really in a police state, a criminal state, and Russian-type state. So how can you say that you do not fear anything? But then the stake is so high, it's deciding really for the future of this country, for the independence of this country, and my grandparents and parents left this country because of the Russian occupation. I'm not going to do that.
Mm-hmm. Now, there's some serious sanctions that could be employed. The United States Treasury with OFAC, for instance, which would significantly impact, if we're looking at potentially oligarchs or other Georgian individuals. We haven't seen that kind of sanctions package. We haven't seen that on the European level either. The question is, would that be enough to dissuade Georgian Dream to change its course?
Well, nobody knows what would be enough to dissuade them because it depends on the level to which they are under strict control by Russia. What I've described is that they are acting and behaving and creating a state that is on the Russian model, but nobody can say how much they are completely in the hands of Moscow. So that is something that has to be tested by our partners, and the best way to test it is really to see, and that's more of the American sanctions, who can reach to the elite that is around Mr. Ivanishvili. But that will depend on the new administration, probably. And the new administration, I think, should look at Georgia as a country where they do not want to have a new crisis, where they do not want to have a government that is going to serve the interests not only of Russia, but of Iran, of Syria's old regime, or some terrorists with whom the Prime Minister has been willingly taking pictures and meeting with. So the stake there too is to know whether the United States want to have stability, wants to have security in the Black Sea and across the Caucasus, which is in their hands.
Mm-hmm. And also an enduring message that you have to the European Union, to leaders across the bloc of your presence here. What would you like Europe and the world to do next for Georgia?
Well, support the Georgian population and help us to get the only way out, that is a peaceful way out of this situation, elections, free and fair elections, that will return Georgia on its European path. It's not a revolution. Georgian dream will probably stay to the extent and with a percentage that it deserves really in the population. And then we can have a coalition government. That's the normal path for normal Georgia, normal European Georgia.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you, Madam President, so much for your time. And thank you for watching. That was Sasha Farbach speaking to Georgia's President, Saakashvili, here at the European Parliament for TVP World.
And with that, we end our service, but please do stay tuned here on TVP World as we have World News Online coming up next.